Welcome to the Red Cool Studio. I'm Rachel Barrett, your host, and we are back with the highly anticipated conversation follow-up here with Ron Marshall, and we also have Brad Tschida with us today, both former legislators for Montana. Thanks so much for being here with us, gentlemen.
Thank you for having me.
Happy to be here.
Well, we'll just jump right in. Why did you get into politics?
That's an interesting question. I had thought about doing it when I was much younger. I was roughly early 30s, but I had 3 children at the time, and my wife said, "You're not going to hell, and leave me here with 3 kids to take care of everything." And I actually tried to sneak in with the liberal side of things. I figured I would be a stealth candidate, but I was quickly found out. So in 2014, I was approached by someone from the Bitterroot Valley to see if I would take the place of a legislator who was not going to run again. Mm-hmm. So I assessed it. I talked to a number of people that were the kind of confidants that I think you need to have when you're assessing these kinds of things. One is my father-in-law, who's one of the most insightful, interesting people I've ever met. And normally he'll look at a problem from 360 degrees and he will give you feedback on it and say, if you do this, this might happen. And when I asked him, he said, "I see no reason why you shouldn't do this." And I asked him, "What have you done with my father-in-law?" Because I expected something totally different. But I just felt there was nothing keeping me from doing this, from running for the legislature. Mm-hmm. So without those obstacles or those barriers being presented, I just decided it was worth assessing. So I had the gentleman I was working for at the time, very, very good friend, still is, and he allowed me to take about a 4-month sabbatical 3 times when I was in the legislature. So
wonderful.
Yeah, so it worked out very, very well.
You served 3 terms?
I served 4.
4 terms.
Mm-hmm. The 3rd term I was a majority leader.
The 3rd term you were a majority leader.
Yeah, so the 2019 session I was a majority leader of the Montana Republic, or of the Montana Republican Party.
And you got the position. What was very different than maybe what you had expected going in?
Pretty broad question, and I think there's a number of answers to that. I mean, first of all, I expected that there would be some political things going on, but I didn't expect it to be as overt and as deep as it wound up being. There were people, we had 58 legislators who were Republicans or had an R after their name. Mm-hmm. And in the previous session, I think in 13, they had 68. So I was thinking with 58, we have a majority, we can get some things done. And I quickly found out that there were about 20 that were not, were depending on how you want to define them, if you want to use Barry Usher's terms, they were transpartisan. Mm-hmm. Or, we referred to them as migratory Republicans, or, whatever they were now. You can call them Democrats in the Republican Party. So I expected that there would be some give and take and some massages, but essentially what happened is there's one legislator in the House who's been in the Senate who controls both chambers. And he decides what bills are going to pass based on the budget that he has built for the legislature. So consequently, excuse me, if you had bills that didn't fit the dynamic of what he was doing, then those bills either died in committee or they died in appropriations. And that was, very, very evident. And it was, the situation was such that it was very disconcerting to be involved in the legislature and to know that there were good bills that you needed to have passed that, for whatever reason, didn't fit the overall program that was established. And at the time, we were in Steve Bullock's 2nd term, actually. Mm-hmm. Yeah, in his 2nd term. And deals were being made based on that budget so that certain bills the Democrats wanted would be passed, and bills that some of the Republicans wanted would not be passed. And they had a grand bargain in 2015 where they gave what they called 6 silver bullets, and they allowed certain bills to be blasted out of committee without the normal requirement for a supermajority of 60 votes to get them out of committee. And one of them was Medicaid expansion. And that bill got out of committee, and it passed the House floor, and it passed without really the kind of support that I thought we would have. But the biggest one that passed in 2015 was the CSKT Water Compact. And that was passed using coercion, manipulation, using information that was not necessarily accurate or was used to force legislators to vote on the measure. And one, for instance, was that the tribe claimed that they had 10,000 water rights claims that they were going to file if the bill didn't pass. And they could extend into eastern Montana because the claims that the CSKT were making went as far east as the Fort Peck Reservoir up to Malta. So it included water claims in that area. So a lot of legislators from eastern Montana did not want to go back to their constituents and say, look, I voted against this, but you could be subject to 10,000 water rights claims, which is going to cost them an awful lot of money, an awful lot of attorney fees, an awful lot of time. So they were forced, manipulated, coerced into voting for that bill without having a clear understanding of what that bill did. So the idea that good bills will pass because they're good bills is a figment of people's imagination. If the people who control the legislative environment in concert with the governor want bills to pass, they will pass. If they don't want them to pass, then unfortunately those bills will go down in a flame. So,
Wow, I know, Ron, you touched a little bit on that last time as well. Who's at the top kind of setting the tone and really deciding how the session is going to go? Is that pretty consistent over the years, or is that a position, like how do you get into that position?
All I know, from what I know, and Brad obviously was there before I was, but from what I've seen from my first session, which was 21 up until this session here, you were made, like I was given the opportunity to be chair of HHS. Well, you start talking to people and you know they're going to be leadership. And all of a sudden you start seeing where all the arrows are going to go. Who's going to be this chair? Who's going to be vice chair? I mean, the positions are doled out in accordance with your support. But there's one chair that is a given that nobody will touch. It's a given. And I'm not going to name names, but I'm sure you know who I'm talking about. That one position, because that position, like Brad said, between that committee and the governor's office, everything rides right there. And like Brad said, there's bills up there, there's good bills that will not, if you don't talk to them and get their anointing, your bill, no matter how good it is going to fail. My bill 148, which was a bill to exempt all the Social Security benefits from income tax. First thing somebody said to me was, well, have you talked to the second floor? You know, what do they think? And I'm like, no, why should I, a legislator, talk to the second floor? That's a separate branch of the government. Well, it's probably not going to pass. I said, well, we'll just see. And ultimately it went across the floor and then goes down into appropriations and dies. So, you know, it wasn't part of their budget scheme and it wasn't part of their plan, and you didn't go through and get the anointment. So we'll just kill your bill. Yet the whole time they're up there talking about, we got to do something about taxes and, you know, reduction here, reduction there. Boom, there it goes. So,
Right. Well, I would have thought that things on Social Security would kind of be a given. Like,
right.
The intent of that was to be more like a savings account in the beginning before it all got lumped together and appropriated other places. But I mean, we're taxed so many ways. I feel like there's probably a couple of easy ways to bring some relief, and that to me would be at the top of the list.
Yeah, it was 148 was low hanging fruit because the new administration in D.C. had already said that they wanted to do away with that. And you know, Brad, he asked him, but the way we tax Social Security in Montana is directly married with the way the federal government, it's tied together. So if the federal government says, well, we're not going to tax it anymore, that comes all the way back into Montana as well. And if you read the tax bill, you see where it's married together. And I told him, I said, we can either pass this now or we can wait till they do it at the federal level. So either way, I mean, and their arguments didn't make any sense. You know, they were talking about, well, we're going to be short $150 million by the year 2029. I think you got enough time to figure out how to make up that difference. And we've been sitting on a budget surplus now for the last 4 years of over $2 billion. Yeah. So yeah, if you don't play the game, if you don't play their game by their rules, then you're done. It doesn't work that way. And the other thing is too, Brad's talking about Medicaid expansion. We just passed that bill. That was all choreographed. They already knew that bill was going to pass, and people saying, call the governor's office, tell him to veto that bill. He's not going to veto that. It was in his budget package. He already budgeted for that bill. You're not going to kill it. He's not going to veto that.
So that one came about originally in 2015, correct?
Mm-hmm. Correct.
So what was that conversation like? If you remember what that was a little bit, how they presented that and sold that bill forward.
Part of it had to do with the cost of insurance and availability of insurance for a variety of individuals. Now, they could have gone out on, into the marketplace and could have found insurance, but this obviously was lower cost for a variety of folks. And if you look back at the history of Medicaid, it was established to take care of mothers and small children, pregnant women.
Mm-hmm.
But that particular bill allowed childless adult males to participate in Medicaid. And they added a work requirement for it. But that work requirement had been deemed unconstitutional in other states. So it was a gift or a benefit that they thought could help pass that legislation, because if people had to work, then it required them to pay something into the system.
Mm-hmm.
But I can only speculate, but I believe that they knew that it would never fly. So consequently, they passed a measure that allowed people to come into the state, or who were in the state or who came into the state, to access Medicaid. And I'll give you an example. I have a friend who's an orthopedic surgeon. And there was a story about a gentleman and his wife who came into Montana from somewhere in the southeast. And I think it was Tennessee, but not 100% certain. Needed, I think, a knee or a hip replacement. And they came into their motorhome. The wife got a job at a hotel as a domestic. So when they said, what kind of income do you have? They showed that as income. They didn't look at any of the other passive income that they had or any of their investments. They had one of the two members was working at a low wage kind of job. The person got their knee or hip replacement and went through rehab, went through their physical therapy. And when they were all done with that, they hopped back into their motorhome and drove out of the state. So they utilized the revenue in Montana to participate in the program, get the surgery done, and it just cost Montanans money as a result of that person taking advantage of the system. It's a very glaring example, but it's one that's out there, and there's others like that, where people who should not have used the system were using it or abusing it and taking advantage of it. And so then Montanans are on the hook for that. So we still have a bill that allows adult childless males to participate, and they should actually be, going on to the insurance marketplace to pick up insurance and pay for it. But everybody understands that if you're Santa Claus and you say, no, we have a way for you to get a free benefit, free as in somebody else is paying for it, then why would you buy the cow if you can get the milk for free? And that's what they wound up doing as a result of that. So I remember hearing them talk about the benefits of it, but those who did not want to see Medicaid passed were talking about these kinds of examples and made it very, very clear that people were going to take advantage of it. It was going to cost a lot of money. But the reason the state wanted it was because for every dollar the state puts in, the federal government contributes $9.
Mm-hmm.
So if we put in $10 million, we get 90 million federal dollars. If we put in 100 million, you get $900 million back.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got an awful lot of money that comes into the state, but they looked at it as if it was free money.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it comes out of somebody's bank account because it's tax dollars. It's not free. Somebody is paying for that. So consequently, it comes down to money as the driving force, the motivating force to get bills like that passed. So the current Medicaid expansion Same thing. There's a lot of money on the table. Money comes into the state. That money can be used by the executive branch to fund a variety of programs in the state through DPHHS. And consequently, it allows the governor to placate or to reach out to those people who work for state government and say, we have more money for programs as a consequence. So,
Wow.
Yep.
Quite a bit of opportunity. Now, in this session, are they talking about the same things? I know I sat through several presentations on this Medicaid expansion this year, myself, and one of the things I noticed was real consistent is they always mentioned that 60% of the people on Medicaid expansion, they were, I should say, eligible to work, I think is maybe how they put it. But they never actually said 60% are working.
Right.
But people's takeaway was that 60% of able-bodied adults were working.
Right.
No, that's not quite what they said.
Yeah.
I always thought that was really interesting, and it was real consistent over the presentations. So what was that conversation like up in this session?
So,
Is it the same?
yeah, and that was the thing in this session. So this session being chair of HHS, so obviously that bill's coming to my committee. And that conversation started a long time ago, and they were removing the sunset, work requirements, all of that stuff. And I would hear from people, and they'd say, well, if we got rid of Medicaid expansion, if we didn't have that, then my parent who's in a nursing home won't get paid, won't get this money. And I'm like, well, if your parent is in a nursing home, that's Medicare, not Medicaid expansion. The same thing goes the other way. I mean, you've got people who are disabled who can't work, right? Who can't do the everyday job. Well, they should be on standard Medicaid, right? Disability. Why are you on Medicaid expansion and I think you're collecting on, and that's like Brett said, you're getting another program, you have programs stacked on top of programs stacked on top of programs. And, and so when this conversation started and the bill was coming, we all knew it was coming, and leadership came in and said, okay, here's how we're going to do it. We're going to do this. I think they did it in 2015. I think it was on a Saturday. They did an all-day hearing on Saturday, I think. And they wanted to do this bill, the Republican version, and then they wanted to do the Democrat version all on the same day. And I'm like, well, how's that going to work? Because the original bill was all done, took one day.
What do you mean they wanted to do one and then the other? What is that difference?
The Democrats were bringing their version, which was free everything. And they knew it wasn't going to pass. And so the deal was struck that you present both the bills. We know ours is going to go down. So in the background, we're going to support yours, but we know we just have to make it look good. It's all smoke and mirrors. The Democrats bring their version, the Republicans bring their version, and we know that the Republican version is going to pass because, well, we know the governor has already budgeted for it in his budget. And I mean, it's just the hearing, setting it up, who was going to go first, what was going to be said, the time frame. I mean, and that's why when it got to, at the end, when you do questions, the committee members are to ask questions from participants, very few questions. Because everybody knew. It was just throw a couple of questions out to make it look good, and there it is. And we all knew it was going to pass. I mean, they talked about it, leadership, we can't stop it in the House. We don't have the votes. You've got that group of people in the House, and the Democrats aren't going to vote against it. So you knew that select group, that what do you call them, transpartisans were going to vote for it, right? So you knew the votes were there to pass it. And then everybody was thinking, well, it would go to the Senate. Maybe the Senate, with what they have over there, could put the kibosh on it. Well, we all see where the Senate's at today. It's a dumpster fire, so that was never going to happen. So, yeah, I mean, it all goes back to who rules the roost, really. You think the House controls the purse strings up there? Oh, no. No. Yeah, as a legislator in the House, why should I have to talk to anybody else? But apparently, if you don't get ordained and, blessing, for your bill, then you get whacked. But this Medicaid expansion was all a big show. All a big show. They knew it was going to pass. It was budgeted. Nobody was going to stop it.
I understand the need for the program, but who's profiting ultimately from this situation? Tell me a little bit about how that works.
Well, the one argument I heard from the hospitals, if we don't pass this, our rural hospitals are going to close. I said, okay, really? So what were you doing before Medicaid expansion? You still had rural hospitals, right? So what'd you do before that? It's not what you think. We were on the verge. And I'm like, really? You were on the verge? Well, then, if, for example, in the Bitterroot, you had Bitterroot Health, and they got a new clinic down in Darby. They got a new clinic up in Stevens. They got clinics all over the place. It's like, well, if you guys are so close to being on the verge of closing, how are you affording all these new clinics and everything? And it's, they sit there and say, well, we don't get the money, that we should. Well, here's who pays the money. The people who pay the money are people on private insurance. That's who pays the bills. If you go in there and you don't have insurance, we'll take care of it because we're a 501c3. We got to be a charitable organization, so we're going to whack your bills down to nothing, put you on a little payment program. Oh, I see you have private insurance. Yeah, that's where they really hit you because they know private insurance is going to pay for it, right? And they know that when you come over here to Medicaid expansion or Medicaid or any of that, it's a set rate. They know they can bill this and get that paid. But, yeah, the people in the middle are the ones that are paying for it.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And, of course, the more people you have on it, the more visits you bill for, you generates that cash flow, I guess you could call it. In the meantime, interesting.
Yeah.
So, Ron, you mentioned a little bit about the daycare situation.
Yeah. Best Beginning Scholarship.
Tell me a little bit about that.
So, Best Beginnings. So last session there was a bill ran, and the state of Montana was receiving a $15 million a year grant from the federal government to be used towards this Best Beginnings Scholarship, which is basically daycare. And if you fell within a certain percentage of the poverty level, the federal poverty level, or FPL, you were eligible to receive the scholarship to help offset the cost of daycare and childcare. A former legislator last session ran a bill to codify that and basically take that grant and put it into the state budget permanently. So if the grant went away, then the taxpayers of Montana are now permanently on the hook for that. I didn't like it then, voted against it, but it passed. Go figure, because that's money coming in again. Well, then this session, there were two bills that were brought up, 456, 457, both by the same gentleman out of Missoula. One was for $17 million, and that $17 million was to increase the amount of money from the state going into, and this is ongoing, this is every year ongoing, to put that much money into this Best Beginnings, okay, to offset childcare. Well, what the bill also did was lower that poverty rate from the federal rate of 185% of the federal poverty rate down to 85% of the median income of Montana. So you're lowering the bar, putting more people on and shoveling more money into it. The companion bill was $5.5 million, and what that was for the daycare centers. Now, mind you, these are supposed to be private businesses, okay, to give them $5.5 million so that they could increase pay, bonuses, and they could get people in there, and to help pay for the employees at the daycare
Mm-hmm.
so that they could pay for their daycare and childcare services. Now, to me, as a business owner, if I offered, if I had an employee and I wanted to give them a benefit, well, you're working at a daycare, well, you can bring your kids in and that's a benefit. You don't have to pay for
That's
it.
how a lot of them do it.
Not these people. These people charge for it. So they're charging their employees, and the employees are being offset by the state, by the taxpayer. So when you sit down and write out your check for your income tax every year and send it to the state, think about that. Yeah. And we spend right now, the last time I looked at the books, about $41, $42 million a year just in federal funding comes into the state of Montana for daycare and childcare.
Just for daycare.
Mhm.
Wow.
Yeah. That's not counting what the state's paying now. So, yeah, I mean, we're subsidizing daycares at a huge, just ungodly amount of money.
Well, and I mean, we need daycares because adults have to work. But unfortunately, we're all feeling the crunch of inflation here.
Mm-hmm.
So even though, some of us have been blessed enough to not have to have every parent in a home working, it's tougher and tougher. So I understand the need for the daycare. Should it be made up with federal funds? I don't know.
Well, we're talking state and federal.
Right.
And the thing of it is they have written at DPHHS has written the rules so tight on if you had somebody else decided you wanted to open up a daycare, in your home.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The rules are so tight and the requirements are so great that it becomes it's overwhelming. You can't do it. It's actually a hindrance for daycare. And the people that are doing it now are they're groups. This is another thing. The people running these daycares all have friends inside DPHHS. They're tied together. And you see that during the hearings. You hear the same people coming up there, and they're all working together, and they all want to be nonprofits, and they want to be this, and it's like, how can you be a nonprofit? And it's a joke. I mean, the web is yeah.
The whole nonprofit thing covers everyone's getting in on it these days.
Yeah.
Anybody can be a nonprofit, and for almost anything, it seems. It's pretty open-ended. Let's touch base a little bit on that rulemaking authority. I've found it to be quite the complex issue. Most recently here, listening to the ethics hearings, there seems to be a lot of people involved in decision-making. It really seems to be pieced out. Am I interpreting that accurately? Who gets to make all of the rules?
Well, the legislature should be making the rules.
Yep.
That's one of the obligations.
That's what I thought.
If they pass legislation, it should have a pathway forward for how to implement that.
Mm-hmm.
But because of their, lack of interest or desire to address that, then they wind up passing the rulemaking on to the agency and say, here's what we want you to do. So write rules that will accomplish that. Instead of saying, here's what we want you to do, here's the rules to implement it. If you have to make tweaks, that's fine. It's sort of like the Chevron deference that the Supreme Court voted down, where instead of having an agency write rules, having unelected bureaucrats write the rules, now it has to be the legislature that's writing those rules. And that, to me, is the responsibility of the legislature. So we should be putting together the general rules that say, here's how it needs to be implemented. If there has to be some tweaking, that's fine. Because, obviously there are certain things that are going to come up that are going to require a little bit of nuancing. But the gate is wide open now for the individuals to write their own rules and determine how a particular policy is going to be implemented. And if there's a decision that's made, or if there are decisions made, legislators would then have to go back and review what the legislative intent was of that particular piece of legislation to determine if the rules comport with that. So it should be a matter of the legislators being the ones that write the rules.
Mhm.
They may be a little bit broad, but they shouldn't be ignored, or it shouldn't be passed on to the various agencies. Those agencies should be required to follow what the guidelines are established by the legislature and then implement those rules accordingly. So the unelected members of our state government are the ones that are making decisions, and they have the power because they can look at the legislature and say, okay, they are here for 90 days. And when they're gone, we'll do things that serve our purpose. I mean, I heard somebody say that the legislature, when they're in session, is a 90-day impediment to parking on the Capitol complex.
Yep.
That's one of the issues that occurs as a result of that we are not seen as a co-equal branch. So when we give the rulemaking responsibility or authority to those agencies, we are giving away the power that the legislature should have. So we are, or the legislature is, I should say, the weak child of the three branches of government, when they should be the strongest branch, because they are the ones that represent their constituents. They represent 10 or 20,000 people, or represent those precinct committee men and committee women who are elected to represent 1,000 people each, more or less. And they bring their desires to their legislators, who then take those desires to the table and say, here's what the people want to see.
Right.
Well, that's not happening. The legislature is giving away their authority, so they are weakening themselves, and we're seeing it now that you've got a complacent legislature who's going to do what the second floor wants, and they do not have much power, especially when you have somebody who is building the budget and saying, these are the items, these are the bills that we want to see passed because we have X number of dollars. These bills fit into that because of the plan we've devised. Other bills don't fit into that. So it's a situation that should not be occurring at the state level, because government should be what they call, trying to think of the term that they used, and it'll come back to me, subsidiarity, which means that which is closest to the people should have the most power.
Right.
And that is not the case right now. So people who are saying, we need to see tax relief, we need to see our bills go down, we need to see, some sort of constraint placed on the government. Well, when the government has the power, when the government employees have the power to do things, it doesn't work. You basically undo your ability to accomplish the goals that the citizens are asking for. So consequently, the citizens are the ones that are getting browbeat with all these pieces of legislation that should not be passed, or should be passed in a much different form than they are. And, they come back to their legislators and say, why are you allowing this to happen? And they don't realize the mechanisms that are going on inside the legislature and what is being done in opposition to what people want to see happen in their lives. So it's a tough situation, and people who think that, well, Montana is different or state governments are different, they're no different than the federal government. There are way too many people involved in state government. There's a lot of areas that could be distributed to the private sector who would do it more effectively and more economically than is being done now by the federal or by the state government, but they're not utilizing those services.
Right. Well, I think that's a great option, to hire out some of those things, because you can still dictate the rules and how to implement things. That's the job. But if that's not being done, and citizens here who try to participate and follow along and are coordinating people to come up and tell their story, which is very nerve-wracking for anybody who hasn't testified or been in the public eye at all. People are stepping up and doing this, hoping that it's making a difference. But is it making a difference if legislature's pretty much given away the farm? Where's the power of the body? And if you've given it all away on the down channel here, and you have a select, I'll just say a few select, who are kind of dictating how things are running, where is the power of that body then?
Yeah, good question, because I can, I think I explained it I don't know if it was the first time we talked or not, but you have this like tier level of bills. You have the low hanging fruit. Let's rename a section a highway or a bridge. This session, let's make rodeo the state sport. There's no rulemaking in that, but any bill you look at, they're tiered off. You have the ones above that where the public might have a little bit of sway, because it's not really anybody's pet project. The second floor is not really looking at it. Leadership's not looking at it. You got a couple of agencies that are like, yeah, we don't care. You have that. Then you have the next level, and that's usually where all the tragedy starts to hit, because that level is being used to sway this level. Well, if you don't vote this way on this bill, the priority bills, then we're going to come down here, and anything you have down here, we're just going to kill it. Okay? But with that, and going into rulemaking, if you take any bill, pull it up on the website, just pick a bill at random, pull it up, and you read through that bill, towards the bottom, you're going to see an effective date, you're going to see rulemaking authority, and who has it. Now, if you write a bill, and I've written a few of them, and the first thing I've done is look in the back to see if there's anything in there, and go, well, nope, I dotted all my I's, I crossed all my T's. It's pretty much what it is what it says is what it's supposed to do. Rulemaking, I've had the drafters pull the rulemaking authority out of it completely, just strip it, because there's no need, because you leave that door open. And that's daycare is a perfect example. They've written, you have in the interim committee, in between the session, you have interim committees, and they will send you packages of rules. And if you're fortunate enough to be on, not only was I on the HHS interim committee, but I was also on the Economic Affairs interim committee, I was bombarded by packages of rules for all these bills that got passed in the last session. They and you get packages of, and you're supposed to go through these rules to go, wait a minute, what's this, what's that?
Who's writing the rules that you're
So
getting?
that's the agencies. The agencies, so if you wrote, a bill on daycare, okay, it would be DPHHS that would be writing the rules package for that. And I mean, some of those people over there, you need a law dictionary to go through half of that stuff, because it's it's a hot mess. And you're supposed to go through and read through all this and kind of correlate all this stuff together and go, I got to remember the bill. What was the intent of this bill? And you can, in the interim committees, and we've done this, is you can get in there and go, you know what, we don't agree with this rules package, and here's why. And you can list some stuff out. And you can do an objection to the rule as a committee, and you can do a formal objection. And all that does is the committee says, no, you can't, we're going to do a formal objection to this rule package. And notice will be sent to the Secretary of State's office, they can't implement that rule package until the next session begins. And then they're free to do it. So, again, we gave away our,
What would the point be in pushing it down the road to the next session?
It would be in hopes that the next legislature could come in and then do a bill. Again, here we go. Do another bill to correct that package. It's like a train wreck that just doesn't stop. It just keeps moving down the track.
Well, I would think that it would make more sense to take care of that on the front end and to clarify that instead of giving that away and having to clean up any messes. I know over the years I've had lots of conversations with people who have found discrepancies. Why is this agency doing it this way? This goes against the law about this. And why are you changing this into something that this wasn't what that bill was,
Right.
Some of them even have helped on those bills, and they're like, this wasn't part of that. How do we hold you accountable? Well, unfortunately, if you don't have a way through legislatively to years down the road is what ends up happening. We just don't have the money tree available
Right.
to start suing everybody when we shouldn't have to in the first place.
No. No.
This
The
should,
the agencies have their own staff attorneys.
Mhm.
So you have tax dollars that are paying attorneys to defend things that should not even have been done in the first place.
right,
Yep.
So our dollars are being used against us
right.
because we're fighting this enormous bureaucracy. And as you said, Rachel, we would have to go out and secure legal representation to address those issues. And unfortunately, there's not a lot of attorneys who have the time or the expertise to be able to do that. And I mean, I have a friend who's an attorney in Missoula who does a lot of pro bono kind of stuff, but you know, that vacuum gets filled up pretty quick with things that need to be done that they're doing, you know, at little to no cost, but they have to pay their bills. So consequently, a lot of things that they might want to take on are then not addressed by anyone unless you can find an attorney with the background expertise and somebody who can pay their fees to defend that. But again, you're going up against a well-funded, powerful agency that's using our money. I mean, if you look at the whole USAID issue at the federal level, tax dollars were being used for horrific purposes, and we had no idea what they were being used for, and they were being used against the people who were paying that money in. So we're basically, you know, loading the gun up ourselves and handing it to somebody, rather than having the ability as citizens to go in and address those kinds of issues.
100%.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's just mind-blowing to me.
Yeah, try to do a FOIA request with any agency up there,
Well, and that's,
you know,
I'm
and
hearing a lot about that too.
you will probably have to contact an attorney because they will receive it. They will contact you back to clarify the keywords or what you're looking for, and you won't hear from them again. Delay, right? And
Well, and everything's electronic now.
Mhm.
For years, everything's electronic. There shouldn't be any going down to the basement for most of these requests, you know, trying to find an old box that isn't waterlogged here. Like, this isn't old school. It's all archived in your computer system. It should be typing in a search term here or two and dragging and dropping, right? And getting that okayed and sending it off. This should take minutes or maybe potentially a couple of hours. This shouldn't take months or, you know, this isn't like it used to be.
well,
The access is so much greater. But we have to now take it to the courts
yeah, you,
to get public information that according to the law we're entitled to.
yeah, and
Nobody wants to play ball.
And if they do cooperate, and I mean, my wife and I did a FOIA request on Gallatin County one time on a specific subject, and I got a box, you know, a banker's box that was 5,000 some odd pages, both sides, back to back printed material, and then they charge you for it. So it was over 12, almost $1,300. Because they charge you to give you the information. So,
And again, they could have just dragged it and dropped it into a zip file.
well, my first thing was I was looking at it going, what are you hiding? Because you just buried me in paperwork, so you're hiding something. Oh, and I found it. But yeah, it's just, I mean, that's what they'll do. And if you do get the information back, they're going to charge you for it.
Which, again, most people don't have
Exactly.
those kind of funds.
Mhm.
Which makes people stop asking questions,
Mhm.
which is really unfortunate. We feel the frustration, and we continually have roadblocks. And where do we go? What do we do? It's hard to feel like you're making any progress
Right.
when you aren't aware of how things actually work. So for both of you guys, getting into the legislature and trying to figure out those dynamics. How did you figure out how to get things done within the system? I have to play by these rules, but I don't like them.
It's, for me, was I said, you know what? I am not going to come in here and I am not going to play I don't know how to say it. It's you have to play by the rules, but I am not going to become beholden, especially to lobbyists and special interests. I think my first session I went to 8 dinners total, the whole session. Not every night. A lot of people every night they're out to dinner with the lobbyist or this group or that group. I think I went to 8 total, and those were generally committee dinners. The whole committee was there, or joint committee. And then at the end of the session, they usually have a last gathering or whatever for the different committees. Yeah, I didn't, it's like, hey, we're going to take you out to dinner. That's nice. No, thanks. I wasn't going to do that. And then the other thing is I didn't want to get into this, I'll scratch your back, you scratch mine, start trading, wheeling and dealing and playing the politics, You better vote for my bill or I'll come after you kind of, you start getting down into that.
Do people say that?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I've had people tell me, better back me up, or if you don't. I had a senator call me on a bill that tried to tell me, you got to vote for that. And I read the bill. I'm like, okay, it sounds good. And then you look at the fiscal note and actually see what it really does and then vote against it. And it's like, yeah, I mean, you talk about, oh, okay, you lied to me. You did it. I'm like, no, I read the fiscal note and found out the truth. I'm not going to vote for that, and then, boy, yeah, you, yeah, you can get some arrows slung at you real fast, real quick. So, I mean, there's that kind of stuff goes on, especially when you start getting phone calls from people who rarely even talk to you, and suddenly they're your best friend. Something's up.
Now, Brad, when you were majority leader, did you find that shifted the dynamics a little bit?
Personally, yes, because I have a very good friend who's a former state rep and a former state senator who made a comment one time, and I thought it was one of the highest compliments that I'd received from anybody, and that was that I was not transactional. I would not do things because somebody wanted it done or wanted to trade, a vote. I didn't have that many people ask me for votes. I mean, if they thought a bill was good and they were able to demonstrate that it was good and show me that it accomplished the mission, then I would vote for it. But one of the things that you need to do in the legislature is find people who are experts in certain areas. So if a bill comes up, I mean, I remember one of the blessings of being in the legislature, all the great friends I made, like Ron. So Kerry White brought a bill that eliminated property taxes. It was a sales tax bill that eliminated property taxes. It was a 2.5% sales tax that generated more revenue for the state than property taxes generate.
Wow.
And it required people to make decisions on things they were going to buy. It exempted the things that typically are exempted in sales taxes, in sales tax states. Medicine is exempted, raw foods are exempted. Those kinds of things were left out of the equation. But if I went out to buy a $10 meal at a drive-in and there was a 2.5% sales tax on, I would pay 25 cents extra for that meal, and I'd have to make the decision, is it worth me spending that? So the bill, it died. I mean, it died 82-18 on the House floor. I was one of the 18 that voted for it because I wanted to see that study, because we have people that talk about the crippling effect of property taxes. I know somebody who works for the Department of Revenue, and property taxes are going to go up enormously again this go-round. So here was a bill that would have gotten rid of it. The bill they have now reduces property taxes, or at least the claim is they reduce it. But everybody knows if you reduce it a little bit and you need revenue, you raise the property taxes back up to where they are, or you increase the sales tax. The state of Montana, if I remember correctly, constitutionally has a 4% cap on sales tax. So that's the highest you can go. You can't go above that. So a 2.5% sales tax would have replaced property taxes. It would have generated the revenue that the state needs to operate. So consequently, it was a bill that I think needed to be studied, because if people are being, forced out of their homes through property tax eminent domain, they need a way to be able to remain in their homes. This would have done that. But it never went beyond kind of a cursory study. But it was, I think, 637 or 647 pages long. It was enormous.
Wow.
And I read about 35 or 40 pages of it, the first section of it, all the new information that I could get my head around, but there just isn't time to be able to read a bill of that length and understand it. So you go to people who have expertise, whether it's somebody in natural resources, FWP, in taxes, whatever it is. You go to them and say, here's a bill that we're going to be voting on tomorrow. What are your thoughts? You've read it, you understand it. They would tell you it's a bad bill or it's a good bill. And you relied on their expertise and their integrity. And that's what I wound up doing. I said, if I can't read it and understand it thoroughly, I don't want to vote on it. So I'll always be in the know if I can't get to a point where it makes sense. But consequently, if I have somebody who understands it and I go to them and I say, is it a good bill? And they say, yes, it is. And it's somebody that I trust, then I could be assured that my vote for it would be an accurate vote. But normally, if a bill isn't good, you don't vote for it. I mean, my first term, I had a bill I thought was wonderful. And one of my buddies in the legislature from Bloomfield, Montana, or Broomfield, Montana, I'm not sure where Alan's from, but anyway, he killed it in his committee. He killed it in judiciary. And I said it was a good bill. And he said, it was horrible. We're not going to pass it. And I went, why? And he laid out the reasons why. And I went, yeah, I understand why. But it was my understanding or naivete was that I thought it accomplished the mission it was going to accomplish. So consequently, there are people who will, one side of the aisle to the other, work on bills and say, I know you need some folks to support your bill from the Democrat side. Here's a bill that we need to see passed. And there will be that kind of horse trading going on. I was told my first term, and I still believe it now, if a bill is good, it should pass on its merits. But what we found out, and Ron alluded to it, I alluded to it, is that if there is this package already established and you have a great bill, but it doesn't fit into that package, they'll look at it and go, yeah, we just don't have the money to be able to accomplish that bill. So consequently, we're going to get rid of it. And if you look back at the 23 session, there was a $4+ billion surplus in the state of Montana. So the state overcollected $4 billion. They used some of that money to pay off low-interest debt, which to me was a mistake because if you have to go out and borrow now, you're borrowing at a higher number. And then they took some of that excess and they put it into a variety of accounts that were already more than fully funded. The Budget Stabilization Reserve Fund, the Ending Fund Balance, the Fire Fund, all these funds now have far more money than they needed. And there's a huge surplus of dollars. And now in this particular biennium, there's a $2 billion surplus. Well, of that $4 billion, only about between $800 and $900 million went back to taxpayers. So less than 25% was returned to the people who paid it in. And now we've got $2 billion, and I don't know that people are going to see any kind of relief there. And Ron talked about his Social Security bill, the one that would exempt retirees from paying taxes on their Social Security. I'm currently receiving it, so it would benefit me. So I might recuse myself from that vote, but I had somebody who said we need to do more broad-based tax relief, not just targeted to specific areas. But if you look at Montana, we have 1 million people in the state of Montana. We have 1,100,000 people. We have one of the highest per capita groups of military retirees and retired persons in the state of Montana. So I think tax relief specific to them, especially people who have been here, their entire life. I haven't been. I've only been here since I was 9. So I've been in Montana for 62 years. Well, not 63. So that doesn't quite make me a native. But the bottom line is people who want to stay in Montana should not be forced out of their homes or off their property as a result of the overwhelming burden that property taxes put on. Sales tax in the state of Montana would allow us to capture monies from out-of-staters who are going to be buying goods in the state that are not exempt. They're going to be staying at hotels. I mean, even people in Montana are still paying the bed tax, so we know that they're going to be paying it. But consequently, we could recoup some of those monies from out-of-state folks. We have a family reunion coming up this summer, and there are probably going to be 80 people coming from the People's Republic of Minnesota, and they're going to be out here to hang out with us. And they are a great group of folks. I have a wonderful, wonderful family. But they would be staying at hotels and motels. They would be buying goods. They might be taking float trips. They're going to be paying a tax on that. So we'd be able to ask them to pay for a share of the burden that occurs on our infrastructure by means of these things. So when we have people who are saying, well, we don't want sales tax, I believe they're saying it because they don't want sales tax, income tax, and property tax. And in 2021, Derek Skees, who was a former rep from Kalispell, great guy, one of my closest friends in the legislature, had a bill that said Montana has 3 forms of taxes: property, income, and sales. Those are available to us. But his bill said that Montana could only have 2 of those taxes at one time. So if you had sales and income, you couldn't have property. If you had you had property and income tax, you couldn't have a sales tax. But it restricted it to 2 of the 3. And people who ran and had R's after their name voted that bill down. So they left the doors open to have a sales tax in the state of Montana because it's going to generate revenue. It's going to create a bigger pot for the people who control the dynamic of the House, the Senate, and the second floor. And they're going to utilize those dollars. If dollars come in, they're going to spend them. That's what they do. They don't look at ways to cut their expenses. They look at ways to grow their operation. So it's we are facing a tremendous uphill battle. And I just want to throw something in that people have accused Ron of, and this to me is just not right. They're claiming that the reason that he decided to surrender his seat and step away from the legislature was because he had a bill on vaping, which is the business he's in, and it didn't pass. So consequently, he said, "Well, I'm done." That is the epitome of falsehood. Ron, that was one of the things that impacted him because you had people who lobby for big tobacco. Other people who support that because of the dollars that come in, they didn't want to see that bill pass, so they killed it. Well, that was one snowflake in the overall snowfall that caused the avalanche. It wasn't the key snowflake, but it was one of those things that caused Ron to go, why am I beating my head against the wall trying to do things that are good for the citizens of the state of Montana? And if we have legislation that does not benefit Montanans, it should not pass. It should die, and we should only make decisions that accomplish one goal. And this is a shout out to John Fuller, former teacher. He's a state senator. He told his classes that in political science that they had to remember one thing and one thing only from his class, and that was, why do governments exist? And the reason they exist is to protect and defend the rights and freedoms of individuals, period. If a bill does not do that, if it takes away somebody's rights or it gives somebody a right but takes a right from somebody else, it's not a good piece of legislation. So we need to get back to that kind of a format where we know what the budget is. And we can have people who are working to build budgets, but they shouldn't be a fixed program. It should be a program that says, well, if Bill A accomplishes the goal and there's going to be a fiscal note, and Bill B would do some good, but it's not as good as Bill A, then Bill B has to die, and we need to make room for the other bill. And right now we're not doing that. And the representative from the Conrad area is the one who's controlling things. People can figure out who that is. It's not a surprise. Everybody in the legislature knows, and most of the people in the state know who that is. And we have to get away from a select group of individuals, from an oligarchy that is making decisions based on what they think is the right thing for Montana, whether it benefits them directly or indirectly. If it doesn't benefit the citizens in the state of Montana, those kinds of pieces of legislation should never see the light of day. They should die, and we should pass bills that basically protect people in Montana.
Wow, that's very well said. I think that's what most of us hope for. And I do hope that we can really focus and get back to that. I absolutely do. You've talked a lot about the funding. I would love to hear about what several people have called the governor's slush fund.
ARPA money.
Could you tell me what that's the nickname for and kind of how that came about?
Yeah, that's...
Well, the ARPA fund, I mean, we had that was American Recovery Plan Act, I believe is what ARPA was. And then we had the Inflation Reduction Act. We've had all these federal programs that kick money to the state. And if the state didn't take the money and they gave it back to the federal government would give it to other states. So if Montana refused the dollars that were coming in, they could give it to California. They could give it to New York. They could give it to New Jersey. They could give it to Illinois.
And you can't ask for it
And
again,
you
right?
couldn't get it back. No.
Yeah, once
so
it's gone, it's
so
gone.
so they made that contingent. So this money came in. These billions and billions of dollars came into the state of Montana, and you can't spend them all at once. I mean, it's impossible. For example, if they gave the state an awful lot of money for road construction, well, you have a limited season and you have a limited number of contractors that can do the work. So consequently, you've got a lot of money that isn't expended within a certain period of time.
Right.
So the state has that money, and they put that into accounts. And they probably give it to the Board of Investments or some other entity. It's a lot of it goes into low interest accounts, so it's safe. It's not, they're not going to lose that money. So it builds interest. And as a result of all the ARPA dollars that came in and all the interest that was accrued, the governor had access to over $100 million, spent some of it, and I think it's now down to about $84 million, but it's money that has no strings attached to it because it's interest on ARPA money. It's not the ARPA money itself. So the executive can do what they want to, and they'll work in conjunction with the budget director and with those that control the purse strings in the House and that work with Senate Finance and Claims, and they'll decide where that money's going to go. But that $84 million, I mean, that's $84 per citizen in the state of Montana. It's not a huge sum of money, but collectively it's a large sum. And what good could be done with that is not being done now? Or what is going to be the use of it? And what is the oversight on those dollars? That's a real key question to me. I don't know that there is any oversight on it. So we have to rely on the good intentions of the people who have access to that money to spend it wisely and spend it for purposes that protect and defend the rights and freedoms of people in Montana. And I don't know that there's any assurance that that's going to happen.
So that doesn't go back into the general fund. That's in its own account then, is what it sounds like.
I believe that's the
Yep.
case.
So
Yeah.
why wouldn't that just go back into the general fund?
That's a question that answers itself. Yeah, because the people who have access to it then cannot spend it the way they might see fit. So putting it in the general fund would help to, bring down some of the costs of things if that were, the desire. But
I mean, that would make sense to me.
Well, that's the thing. And rumor has it that they just spent a whole bunch of that interest on another piece of real estate for the Department of Health and Human Services. So, yeah. Why do you have to go through appropriations if the money's not on the books, so to speak? You can just go, yeah, we'd like to, increase our building footprint. So, yeah.
I wonder if there will be rules made for those types of monies in the future and how they're spent and oversight on them.
we can hope for that.
Yeah.
I would hope for that.
Yeah, and I think the citizens in Montana want that because, I mean, if all of us had a windfall, we would look at it and say, where can I best use that in my family? I mean, put it away for retirement or for a college fund for children and grandchildren, for needed improvements or work that you want to do on your home. We would look at it from that standpoint. We wouldn't say, what can I do to grow my deficit or to add to my property? I mean, I remember my wife's family had a business and they gave out bonuses. This is an amazing company. They gave out profit when they were not profitable. They had profit sharing. They're just that kind of people. My father-in-law ran the company and a great guy, but one gal got a bonus one year and she went out and bought a car because she knew that would pay for that car for that year. Well, the next year they didn't have that bonus. And she said, how am I going to pay for my car? Well, that's what government does. They take finite monies or monies with a fixed end, like came out with ARPA, and they did what they referred to as planting acorns. They went out and used it to develop programs. And then once a program was established, they said, we need to continue this because it's a great program. Where are we going to find the funds to do these things? Well, what we need to do is look at dollars that have a finite life and a finite purpose and say, what can we do with those to solve an immediate problem and not create more bureaucracy or more expenses down the road?
Right.
But I don't see that as really ever being the conversation. It's if you take this away, we lose the we have to start cutting somewhere. Well, right, but last time we gave you money, you added 3 new programs. that are partially funded. And so we're always operating on a deficit, and we never have enough people, and we never can function well. Or can we do some targeted programs that work really, really well?
Interesting. I had a conversation with the director of DPHHS one day in a joint meeting with Section B of Appropriations, that's the Department of Health and Human Services. That's their section. And consequently, it's about half of the state budget, by the way, goes to that one agency. 10 out of 10, $12 billion, half of that budget goes to that one agency. And I asked the director, because some of the numbers on some of these programs were looking like, yeah, in a couple of years, this program is going to be, you can't fund it. It's going to disappear. It's going to go away. And I had the conversation with him going along that same line, and asked him, have you started looking at some of these programs that are underutilized that could be, you could take anybody who's involved in that program, citizens that are utilizing it, and put them into, kind of fold it into another program, right? Because again, the redundancy, this program does it. I mean, it's like, how many programs do you need for mental health in Montana?
Well, you need a lot of administrators for all of them too.
Well, yeah, you have Native American, you have veterans, you have, this group, that group, all these different groups with all these different mental health, programs. And it's like, why can't you just put it all together and call it Montana Mental Health? Well, yeah, you've got all the directors and all the people down here that are doing the work. And I think Brad was there during the special session when they had to cut, was it 10%? I think 10% of the agencies had to cut because we're underfunded, called special session. And I don't think the governor got what he wanted. And I'm watching TV one night, and there was somebody up at the Capitol at DPHHS talking to one of the supervisors who's leaning in a doorway with a cup of coffee in his hand, talking about all the painful cuts that they had to make to all the people that provided these services. So the people that were actually in the trenches doing the work got cut, but yet the supervisors like himself, the higher ups, didn't. Completely opposite. I'm sorry, as a businessman, what do? I start at the top and work my way down. Do we really need this many supervisors, this many managers, because the people doing the work, that's where they're doing the work. Why do you cut that? Well, because, you didn't give us what we wanted, so we're going to cut the people who were actually out doing the job, and we're going to make the people suffer for it so that the people turn against the legislators to give us
to give you money.
Yeah, you're turning the people against, and using them, you're weaponizing them, basically.
Well, and you are an administrator in any of the supervisory positions here. To do that well, you are investing in your people. You are knowing the people doing the work. You are actively involved in bettering their lives so they can better everyone else's life too. And if you know how to do that well, you can supervise far more people than one would think, because if I want to show up to work, I'm going to show up to work and I'm going to have a good attitude. Everything gets better. I do my job better, and the whole system functions better. That's what I hope we can kind of get back to some of this, where I feel like we've just lost our way in a lot of this process.
Oh, yeah. Well, one thing I'll touch on it real quick is go look at all the school systems. Why does every school have to have a superintendent? Why don't you have one superintendent for X number of schools? Why do you have to have,
There's a gentleman from Kennesaw State University in Georgia that looked at Montana's education budget, and the student population stayed pretty flat. It went up a little bit, went down a little bit, but between 2005 and 2014, I believe it was either 2005 to 14 or 06 to 15, the cost of education increased by about $1.4 billion in the state of Montana. the student-teacher ratio stayed the same. One of the areas where it went up were administrative positions by growing the program beneath them so that now that program becomes necessary and we can't get rid of it. And as Ron said, the people who were disadvantaged or who were impacted negatively by a lot of the potential cuts we had in 17 were the frontline folks. And everybody was saying, well, we're going to have to cut services. Well, why couldn't we cut administrative positions? I mean, we have people who supervise one person in Montana. We have people who supervise 2 or 3. Why can't we consolidate a lot of those entities and allow one person to supervise 15 or 20 or whatever it is, take 2 or 3 small portions of a department and combine them so that we don't have that person, we don't have that many people supervising. And you've got folks who say, well, we can't do that because we're cutting government positions. We're getting rid of people. Well, government should not be the area where there's the greatest job growth. It should be in the private sector. So we should be looking at finding ways to constrict government to its necessary purposes of taking care of resources, taking care of fire and police, taking care of education. Because Ron mentioned DPHHS, they're about 40% of the budget. Education is about 40% of the budget. Those are the 2 biggest expenses. And DPHHS is not one of the programs that's mandated by our Constitution, but they are one of the largest agencies in the state of Montana. So why don't we take a look at what our obligations are for infrastructure, for natural resources, police and fire protection, and for education, and focus our attention on those areas and make sure we're doing the right thing, instead of going out and growing the government footprint and taking money to buy more buildings. Because every time you take a private business and make it a public entity, it comes off the tax rolls. The people who pay property taxes in that area have a direct impact negatively to have to pay more taxes because spending is here. You've got the number of private properties that goes from here down to here, but you still have this much money. So these people are responsible for making those additional payments, and that is not the way we should be conducting government.
Right.
Well, and how many buildings are left empty that we still own that could be utilized and not have to build brand new buildings?
Right.
There's a lot of good things in there. Thanks so much for coming in today, both of you. I really appreciate you being here and giving us a little bit more behind the scenes here of how things actually have worked for you guys and your experience with the legislature. We really, really appreciate it, and I hope to have you back.
Well, thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks.
We appreciate it.